Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Today we are doing a dispositional theory of personality. What is dispositional theory? It is also known as trait theory, which is a famous theory. So let's begin the class. Gordon W. Allport defined personality as a dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine his characteristic behavior and thought. The term dynamic organization emphasizes that not only is personality constantly developing and changing, but there is within the person some kind of central organization that holds the components of personality together and relates them to each other. The term psychophysical systems imply that a person is not just a hypothetical construct formed by the observer, but a real phenomenon composed of the elements of mind and body fused into a personality unity. And behavior and thought means everything a person does. Personality expresses itself in some way in virtually all observable human actions. Characteristics in Alpert's definition signifies the uniqueness of a single person. Each person has a lot of uniqueness. That's why I think we use the term as organization within yourself. No two people are alike in this personological system. Let's learn the concept of trait and personal disposition. Disposition means nothing but trait. Alpert's approach to the study of personality is characterized by several key concepts. He emphasized on individual characteristics. Alpert's approach to the study of personality is uniqueness of the individual, how unique an individual is. He believed that in some manner, each person is unlike any other individual. According to Gordon Alpert, personality is made up of the traits one possesses. So all of you are made of the, uh, you know, the personality or the traits. So all the traits that you have makes up your personality, not just single trait. A trait is a personal characteristics which stays generally the same over time and is resistant to change. So if you have some kind of trait, throughout the end, it's going to remain more or less same. There's no change. These traits shape thoughts, feelings, and the way a person behaves on any given day. In simpler terms, a trait is a predisposition to respond in an equivalent manner to various kinds of stimuli. So, like your balanced personality, no matter what comes, no matter tsunami or anything comes, you're still balanced. You have a you have that kind of state of mind. So it's not just state of mind. So you have some kind of nature. So if that's your trait, that's how it is going to be throughout. Alport originally used the word traits, but found that so many people assumed that traits were perceived as someone looking at another person or measured by personality tests rather than as unique individual characteristics within a person that he changed into dispositions. A personal disposition is defined as a generalized neuropsychic structure peculiar to the individual with the capacity to render many stimuli functionally equivalent and to initiate and guide consistent, that is, equivalent forms of adaptive and stylistic behavior. In simpler words, personal dispositions were actual neurological structures within a person. That's why it is called personal. So within a person that influence his or her behavior. A neuropsychic system. What is neuropsychic system? Alpert means that the trait of a person are not fictional but real and inherent within a person. The traits are consistent in nature and present even if there is no one around to see them. Like some people have OCD. Even if nobody is watching them, they will do what they are supposed to do. While some traits are hereditary, which are and there are others that are evoked by social situations. So some are hereditary and some again, due to social situation, you just adapt. Guide to a person's behavior. These traits are what makes a person's behavior consistent. If the traits are stable, it can be used to determine how an individual will respond in various contexts or situations. Alport distinguished between common traits, which permit inter-individual comparisons, and personal dispositions or traits, which are unique to the individual. A personal trait is based on traits, but somewhat more complex, such as a unique combination of traits. For example, someone who is tentatively aggressive, not permanent aggressive, so who is tentatively or temporarily aggressive, as opposed to someone who is violently aggressive. So that's the difference. A personal disposition produces equivalences in function and meaning between various perceptions, your beliefs, feelings, and actions that are not necessarily equivalent in the natural world or in anyone else's mind. Another way to put across is dispositions are concrete, easily recognized, it's not abstract, consistencies in your behavior. So it is the behavior is has consistency and it is concrete, which means it is easily uh, recognized or visualized by others as well. So what is the characteristics of trait now? Alport proposed 8 basic defining characteristics of trait. They are as follows. So in total, there are 8 basic defining characteristics of trait. A trait has more than nominal existence. What does that mean now? Personality traits are not fictions. They are very real and vital part of one's existence. Every person possesses inside his or her skin these generalized action tendencies. So that was number one. Number two, a trait is more generalized than a habit. So it's not just a habit, it is a generalized form. And traits account for the relatively permanent and general features of our behavior, while habits refer to more specific tendencies and are less generalized in terms of situations. I repeat, traits account for the relatively permanent and general features of your behavior. So that is trait, permanent and general feature of your behavior. While habits, so there is a difference between habits and traits. What is habits now? Habits refers to more specific tendencies and are less generalized in terms of situations. Now, number three, a trait is dynamic or at least determinative in behavior. Traits underlie behavior, they cause behavior. In Alport's system, traits do not lie dormant waiting to be aroused by external stimuli. Traits guide and direct a person's action. Number four, a trait's existence may be established empirically. Traits cannot be observed directly, but it is possible to verify their existence. Yes, that it exists. A trait is only relatively independent of other traits. That is number five. No trait is independent of the other. They overlap. There is no rigid boundary separating one trait from another. The personality is comprised of a network of overlapping traits only relatively independent of one another. Number six, a trait is not synonymous with moral or social judgment. Personality is important, not character here. Many traits like loyalty, greed, etc. are bound by social demands and socio-cultural factors. So this is what it means. A trait is not synonymous with moral or social judgment. So when you talk about trait is equal to social judgment or moral judgment? No. They are only the demands from the society. Number seven, a trait may be viewed in light of either the personality that contains it or its distribution in the population at large. For example, shyness has both unique and universal aspects. It is unique for the person because it influences a person's life. What? Shyness. While as a trait, if it becomes a trait, it can be studied universally by constructing a reliable and valid shyness scale by using that measuring tool and determine how people differ on it. Number eight, it acts on even habits that are inconsistent with a trait are not proof of the non-existence of the trait. Not everyone shows the same degree of integration with respect to a given trait. Also, the same person may possess contradictory traits. Lastly, there are instances where social situations rather than personality traits are the prime movers of behavior. So these were the 8 characteristics of trait. So if you have 5 traits, you know the number 8, if you have the 5 traits, not everything will be in sequence. Again, one trait could be contradictory with the other. Next, types of traits or dispositions. Any doubts so far? Okay.
All good.
Okay, so let's move on to types of traits or dispositions. Alport placed the levels of personal disposition on a continuum from those that are only important to the person, only important to the person. The 3 levels of personal dispositions are cardinal disposition, central disposition, and secondary disposition. What is cardinal disposition or trait? A cardinal disposition is a trait that defines and dominates one's personality and behavior. It cannot remain hidden, and the individual will be known by it. So you have some trait, and you're known by it. Alport suggested that these dispositions were rare and mainly developed later on in life. Personalities that possess one cardinal disposition, however, are quite unusual. People with such personalities can become so well known for these dispositions that their names are often synonymous with these qualities. For example, Mother Teresa is strongly associated with goodness or kindness and charity, right? Today, her name is virtually synonymous with those traits. When you talk about give an example of kindness, or charity. Yeah. So you would, the first name that would come up is Mother Teresa. And non-violence. First name that comes up is, Mahatma Gandhi. So Einstein is also known for his genius, and today his name is often used as a synonym for brilliance. So that was cardinal trait. So cardinal trait means it is some trait a person is recognized, through that trait. So you have one, everybody has got that kind of a trait. The second is central disposition. Central disposition refers to general characteristics that are present to some degree in almost everyone. These are building blocks of personality. These central dispositions, while not as dominating as cardinal dispositions, are the major characteristics one might use to describe another person. So, this is basically the way you describe the other person. You may not be able to identify the other person only through that trait, but again, this is the major thing. Alport believed that most people have about 5 to 10 central dispositions and that most people contain many of these dispositions to a certain degree. So you have like 5 to 10 central disposition in each person. Examples would be kindness, honesty, or friendliness. It's not just only one person on the earth is kind, right? So many people possess this. Many people are honest, many are friendly. So these kind of traits are very common in most of us. The last is secondary disposition. So first two were cardinal disposition and the second is central. The third is secondary disposition. They are characteristics that surface only in certain situations, not always. So only when there is demand. These are the dispositions that are sometimes related to attitudes or preferences and are not so obvious or so general or so consistent. Examples would be getting anxious when speaking to a group or impatient while waiting in line. Yeah. And you're not always waiting in the line, right? So all these traits are, shown up only when the situation or the context is present. So these were types of traits. So we learned 3 types of traits, that is cardinal, central, and secondary. Any doubts so far?
No doubt.
Let's move on to common traits versus individual traits. Alport also argued that both, we have both individual as well as common traits. Now, what is individual traits? They are possessed by only one individual person. That's why it's called individual trait. What is common trait? They are possessed by all people to a varying extent, to a certain extent. You will not have everything, right? Not 10 people will have all the 10 traits similar. Again, it varies from people to people. Traits never occur in any two people in exactly the same way. Thus, those characteristics peculiar to the individual which do not permit comparisons among individuals are referred to as individual traits. These are called as personal dispositions. Personal disposition is nothing but individual traits, which we already discussed above in detail, didn't we? If you remember. Next is common traits. What is common traits? That make up our personalities. Those are common traits that are shared among many persons within a culture. Alpert identified common traits as the characteristics that most members of a population share as a result of common cultural heritage. Like if you just take up, some religion or any caste, I'm not talking about racism or any caste, I'm nothing biased. But again, it's like suppose you belong to certain sect of the society, then you follow certain rituals and all that, so most of you possess similar kind of traits in you, because it becomes a routine to follow certain rituals and all that. So that's how it is. Culture is transmitted through language and modeling of behavior, which in turn shapes socialization patterns, which ultimately influence the common traits, which therefore help in shaping personality. I would repeat, culture is transmitted through language and modeling of behavior, which in turn shapes socialization patterns, which ultimately influences the common traits, which therefore help in shaping your personality. Common traits are usually possessed by individuals in varying extents, even though they belong in the same culture and are measurable on a scale. Even if you belong to a common culture, some say culture X. Again, your traits are also varying. It may not be 100%, okay, these are 100 people belong to this society and everybody will have the same traits. No, again, it varies from people to people. For example, an Indian girl hailing from a traditional family might be brought up with the notion that females are supposed to be domestic. This is just an example. This is a trait that is valued by Indian culture. Therefore, as she grows up, this trait will be instilled in a personality through the means of socialization, modeling of behavior, and dictation of cultural norms, and will be shared by many other girls of her society. Any doubt here? Okay, so next we move on to the proprium, that is development of selfhood, which is concept of self. It is about you. Some personal dispositions are close to the core of your personality, whereas others are more on the periphery. Those that are at the center of personality are experienced by the person as being an important part of yourself. They are characteristics that an individual refer to in such terms as that is me, that is mine. All characteristics that are peculiarly mine belong to the proprium. Now, what is proprium here? It is concept of self. Now, what is that? Which is consistent, unique, and central in the individual, in you. In order to identify this sense of me or I, Alport recommended the term proprium. Proprium is derived from the Latin term proprius, and it refers to a property common to the members of some class, which is not a part of the definition of that class. In other words, everyone has a personality, but no one's personality is part of the definition of what it means to be a person. Of course, it is not. Albert coined the term in order to avoid the terms ego or self, because the latter terms could imply an object or thing within a person that controls your behavior, whereas proprium suggests the core of one's personality, your own personality. Proprium term is used for self, ego, and it is a core of personality. And it goes beyond the traits, which includes habits, interests, and skills. Alport's proprium refers to the central experiences of self awareness, that people have as they grow and move forward in life. Alpert purposely chose a term with the prefix pro to connote forward movement. Proprium is defined in terms of its function of phenomenological, the things that it does. First, phenomenologically, that is the self as experience, he suggested that the self is composed of the aspects of a person experiencing. If you are experiencing something, what he or she see as most essential as opposed to incidental or accidental, warm or precious as opposed to emotionally cool, and central as opposed to peripheral. It is your experience. Secondly, Alpert describes 7 stages of the proprium functions that develop gradually, slowly, as an individuals grow from infancy to adulthood and constitute an evolving sense of self known and felt. His functional definition became a developmental theory all by itself. Now we will be learning the 7 stages of proprium functions. That again was very famous. Is everybody awake? Because you people are going to summarize, not me. Okay. So let's see from year 1 to 12 plus. Okay, year 1, what happens? Developmental period 1, proprium characteristics about bodily self. How the personality function in this age. A sense of one's body and one's body limits. Year 2, what happens? What is the characteristics? Self-identity. And function, awareness of inner sameness and continuity. That is sense of I. Year 3, characteristic is self-esteem. Functions, feeling of pride for accomplishments. Age 4 to 6, characteristics, self-extension. How does it function? A sense of possession and the relationship of the self to other objects and other individuals, valuing others in terms of the self, my mother or my doggy. 4 to 6 years, self-image. That's how you identify. Development of actual and idealized images of themselves and their behavior, and become aware of satisfying parental expectations also. Okay. Next, development period 6 to 12 years. So how do you identify them? Self as rational coper. They begin to apply reason and logic to the solution of everyday problems between 6 to 12 years. Now, 12 years plus adolescence, what happens? They appropriate strivings, capacity to project into the future and to develop long-term goals with a plan to attain the goals. So when a child reaches 12 years, you ask him what he wants to become. Most of them are actually serious about it. Like at least in that age, they can, visualize their future. They know what they want to become, or they are able to even, you know, uh, make a long-term goals with a plan and work towards it. So these were the 7 stages of the proprium functions that develop slowly. Yes. Alpert's theory, although similar to Freud's, is not a stage theory. This is not a stage theory. Just a description of the way people develop is what he has given. Who is given? Alpert. The infant begins to emerge without the proprium, with no awareness of self initially. Alpert described infants as pleasure seeking, destructive, selfish, impatient. Just imagine your own kids. And dependent. Parent child interaction is vitally important throughout the stages of development of the proprium. As the proprium will not mature properly, the child becomes insecure, aggressive, demanding, jealous, and self centered, and psychological growth is stunted. Traits and personal disposition do not develop, and the personality remains undifferentiated as it was in infancy. Any doubts so far? Okay. Functional autonomy, that is next topic. Most personality theorists view adulthood as an extension of the basic motives present in your childhood, consistent with his belief that personality is always evolving. Personality is always evolving, right? Alport didn't believe in looking too much into a person's past in order to understand his present. His concept of functional autonomy proposes that the motives of mature, emotionally healthy adults are not functionally connected to the prior experiences in which they initially appeared. So, according to him, your past doesn't matter. Forces that motivated us early in life become autonomous or independent of their original circumstances when it occurred. In short, today's motives are independent of their origins. This means that any tie between adult motives and early childhood experience is historical, not functional. So it is primitive. For example, a person who plays a musical instrument during childhood years because of parental pressure may play the same instrument for relaxation or enjoyment as an adult. I think that happens to most of us. So there would be certain things that our parents pressurized us, when we were kids. But then when you grow up, those that actually becomes part of our life. It's like we can't imagine our life without them or that thing. Alpert differentiated between two types of functional autonomy. So we're learning about functional autonomy, and he also differentiated between two functional autonomy. The first is perseverative functional autonomy. What is this? It is the tendency of certain basic behaviors to continue in the absence of reinforcement, even though they may have lost their original function. The main feature here is repetitious activities such as compulsions, addictions to drugs or alcohol, and ritualistic or routine behavior. For example, if you may have started smoking as a symbol of adolescence rebellion, then what happened? It became an addiction to you. Suppose you started drinking alcohol and then later you get addicted to it. That happens, right? So that is preservative functional autonomy. Now, since I told the example, I think it is clear. I would repeat the definition again. It is the tendency of certain basic behaviors to continue in the absence of reinforcement, even though they may have lost their original function, which means initially you started some activity for some reason, and then what happened? Even you still continue to do it, even though the reinforcement is absent. Nobody's asking you to drink, nobody's asking you to smoke, but you continue to do it. The second is appropriate functional autonomy, which refers to the acquired interest. So these are your acquired interest, values, attitudes, and intentions. Their abilities frequently convert into interests. So they are basically your abilities, which are converted into interests. Perhaps you were punished for being selfish when you were a child. That doesn't in any way detract you from your well-known generosity today. It has become your value now. So let's see the differences quickly. First is preservative functional autonomy. The second is appropriate functional autonomy. So preservative is, it consists mainly of your habits. Their behaviors no longer serve their original purpose but still continue. Like I told you, you start smoking, just to show off, and then it becomes your addiction. Behavior is dependent on your habits, addictions, and automatic responses. And they are not controlled by proprium. Now, appropriate functional autonomy. These consist mainly of your values, more self-directed than habits. People select motives that they like and which suits their self-concept. They are directed by proprium. Proprietary functional autonomy is more important than preservative functional autonomy and is essential to the understanding of adult motivation. The maturity of a personality is indicated by the degree of functional autonomy of its motives. Now we move on to the next topic, that is the mature personality. Any doubts so far in preservative and proprietary functional autonomy? I hope all of you are awake with me. Okay, the mature personality. If you have a well-developed proprium and a rich adaptive set of dispositions or traits, you have attained psychological maturity. Alport's term for mental health is that. Alport believed that the emergence of personal maturity is a continuous and lifelong process. The behavior of a mature person is functionally autonomous and is motivated by conscious process. The behavior of immature person is dominated by unconscious motives stemming from childhood experiences. Mature people tend to have a trauma-free childhood, although later years may become conflict and suffering. Age is not a requisite for maturity, but healthy people become more mature as they get older. Alport concluded that the psychologically mature adult is characterized by 6 attributes. So there are 6 attributes we'll be reading about of a mature person, psychologically mature person. So the first is extension of the sense of self, which is mature people care about other people as much as they care about themselves. And immature people are self-absorbed and egocentric. That is extension of the sense of self. Second, warm relating of self to others. That is, mature people can be intimately involved with others without even being possessive or jealous or controlling. They accept people for who they are. Third, emotional security. Mature people can control their appetites. They have a sense of proportion. Immature people are at the mercy of their drives, desires, and appetites. They overreact to threats and disappointments. Number 4, realistic perception of skills. Immature people pursue goals that are unrealistic relative to their talents and perceive the world in self seeking ways. And mature people, on contrary, are more accurate in their appraisal of others and also their own strengths and limitations. That was realistic perception of skills. Next, number 5, self insight. I think most of you know what insight means. Mature people see themselves more or less as others see them, and they also have a sense of humor, while immature don't. Number 6, a unifying philosophy of life. Now, this is a clear sense of what life is all about. It could be religious, but need not be as commitment to a cause, a quest, a search, or a goal will serve the same need. Having something to live for beyond themselves is a key to possessing maturity, according to Alport. That's what we were discussing yesterday about it, right? In the end of the class. So these were the 6 characteristics or attributes of a psychologically mature person. Maturity entails a clear understanding of life's goals and purposes. To sum up, maturity is freedom from one's past and expression of proprietary function. Just give me a minute. Yes. The last topic for today is application, the study of values. Any doubts so far? Oh my God, I hope everybody's awake. Okay, let's move on. Alport stressed that a mature person needs a unifying philosophy of life to make sense of his or her existence. An individual's philosophy is founded upon values, basic convictions about what is and is not of real importance in life. Believing that a person's efforts to find order and meaning in his or her existence are governed by values. Alport worked hard to identify and measure basic value dimensions. The success of his effort is evident in the well known personality test that he helped significantly to develop, the study of values, which was originally published in 1931. He outlined 6 major value types. They are value, that is social, theoretical, economic, aesthetic, political, religious. And how do you describe them? Value care, love, value truth, value usefulness, value beauty, harmony, value power, influence, value unity, religion. The theoretical person is primarily concerned with the discovery of truth, to which they seek in a cognitive way. The economic individual places highest value on which is the most useful. The aesthetic person places high value of form and harmony. They believe life is to be a series of events that are to be enjoyed for its own sake. That's aesthetic person. The social type seeks the love of people. The political person's dominant drive is power. The religious individual places highest value on unity. They believe in unity, who religious people. They seek to understand and experience the world as a unified whole. And most of us, of course, have several of these values at more moderate levels. Yes or no? Yes. Plus, we may have one or two of these quite negatively also. Everything is not positive. So it is all mixed. Any doubts so far? This is it. The class is over. Ritika, could you stop recording? I hope she's not sleeping.
One second, huh? I'm just doing it. I'm not able to find.